7 women who escaped marrying Henry VIII. Henry VIII of England is famous for marrying 6 wives, abandoning 2 of them, and beheading another 2. Some might say he ruined their lives. And though these women may have briefly been queens, they also likely cursed the day they met the royal tyrant. In His Majesty's search for new brides, there were a handful of ladies whom he considered, but he either turned them down or they rejected him. Let's meet 7 lucky ladies who managed to avoid a fateful walk down the aisle with the murderous monarch, and consider how their lives and history might have been different if they had married Henry VIII. Henry's first and longest marriage was to Katherine of Aragon, but their wedding almost didn't happen. She came to England to marry his older brother, Arthur. But months after the wedding, he died of the sweating sickness at 15, and Katherine was left widowed with an uncertain future. While her father, Fernando of Aragon, and father-in-law, Henry VII, argued over her dowry, other possible brides were considered for the new heir to the throne, Prince Henry. Marguerite of Angouleme was 3 when her father died. Her mother, Louise of Savoy, ensured that her 2 children, Marguerite and François, received an outstanding education from the great Renaissance thinkers and artists who visited her court in Cognac. When Marguerite was 10, her mother made inquiries about a betrothal to Henry, Prince of Wales. There was only a 9-month age gap, so Henry could have married her much sooner than other candidates. But his father wasn't keen on an alliance with France. Instead, Louise arranged a marriage between her son and Princess Claude, daughter of King Louis XII of France. Many illustrious grooms were considered for Marguerite, but the king ordered her to settle a legal dispute by marrying Charles IV, Duke of Alençon. He was nearly illiterate and had little in common with his bright and artistic bride. She managed to avoid her husband and never bore him any children. Marguerite hated the dark and medieval castle of Alençon and her pious and overbearing mother-in-law. King Louis XII had only 2 daughters, who were barred from the throne. The 52-year-old took as his 3rd bride King Henry VIII's 18-year-old sister, Mary Tudor, and he tried desperately to get her pregnant. His overexertions in the bedroom likely killed him. Upon learning that her brother planned to wed her to yet another old man, Mary eloped with the man she really loved, Charles Brandon. He'll show up again later. The French throne went to the next male in the succession, François of Angoulême. As sister of the king, Marguerite escaped Alençon and became one of the most important women at the royal court. She held salons which drew great thinkers and artists, most notably Leonardo da Vinci. He died and was buried at her Château d'Amboise. Marguerite wrote her own poems and plays. She was influenced by Martin Luther and Erasmus and became a Protestant. She patronized the printing of evangelical essays and shared them with the other ladies at court, including a young maid of honor named Anne Boleyn, who arrived with Mary Tudor but remained to serve Queen Claude. The queen endured 7 pregnancies in 8 years. Marguerite often stood in for her at official ceremonies. Claude died of exhaustion at 24. Marguerite raised her youngest daughters, Madeleine and Marguerite. King François was taken prisoner in battle by Holy Roman Emperor Charles V. His sister rode her horse through the snowy woods 12 hours a day for weeks to negotiate for his release. After 16 years of unhappy marriage, her husband died, and she remarried to Henry II, King of Navarre. Now the great lady was a queen. She found her new husband more tolerable and had 2 children with him, Jeanne and Jean, though her son died in infancy. Marguerite's intense grief inspired her to write The Mirror of the Sinful Soul, an intense and salacious poem about a woman's yearning for her lover, Christ. She sent a copy to her old friend Anne Boleyn, who by this time was betrothed to King Henry VIII. Marguerite's poem was condemned as heresy in France. A monk said that she should be sewn into a sack and thrown into the Seine. The church violently opposed all efforts of reformation. As other Protestants were tortured and burned at the stake, Marguerite's brother protected her. Francois died at 52, and devastated Marguerite spent 4 months in a convent. She died 2 years later at 57. During the reign of her nephew, Henry II, growing tensions between Catholics and Protestants erupted into the French Wars of Religion. The conflict lasted 36 years and went through Henri and 3 of his sons. When Henry III was assassinated by a monk, the throne passed to his cousin, Marguerite's grandson, King Henry IV. What if Marguerite of Angoulême had become Henry VIII's first wife? Marguerite was certainly wise, beautiful, and strong enough to have made an excellent wife to a young Henry VIII. She had a lot in common with Katherine of Aragon, to whom Henry was initially devoted. The major differences are whether Marguerite might have bore Henry a healthy son, thus avoiding his desperate quest for an heir. She gave birth to a healthy daughter at 36, suggesting she might have been even more fertile in her youth. Catherine was a devout Catholic, while Marguerite was open-minded. Had she wed Henry in childhood, she may still have picked up Protestant ideas later on. The Reformation still might have happened even with a Queen Marguerite. Europe's political landscape would have looked different if Henry and Francois were brothers-in-law. The two strong-willed kings met in 1520 at the Field of Cloth of Gold, but their egos ended their ceasefire. However, peace might have endured with Marguerite smoothing things over. Finally, had things gone as they did with the French Wars of Religion, resulting in Francois' line dying out, France might have been ruled by a descendant of Henry VIII and Marguerite, thus uniting England and France. Eleanor of Austria was the eldest child of Philip the Handsome and Juana of Castile. Eleanor was Katherine of Aragon's niece. She was only 8 when her father died, and her mother, drowning in grief and mental illness, was locked up by her own father, Fernando. Eleanor and her siblings were raised in Brussels by their aunt, Margaret of Austria. She made sure they received an excellent education. Margaret had been appointed regent of the Low Country by her father, Holy Roman Emperor Maximilian I. He began negotiations for the marriage of his granddaughter, Eleanor, to Prince Henry. In addition to the political advantage, preventing Katherine of Aragon's marriage would have pissed off Fernando, and Maximilian hated his dead son's father-in-law. In 1509, Henry VIII became king. The handsome, athletic 18-year-old didn't want to marry Eleanor, a princess he had never seen who was only 11. But Catherine was beautiful, intelligent, charming, 24, and right in front of him. Other candidates for Eleanor's hand included Louis XII, who was 52, Polish King Sigismund I, who was 43, and the Duke of Lorraine. But no husband could be settled on. At 19, she had an affair with Frederick II, Elector of Palatine. Her younger brother, Charles, discovered their love letters and forced his sister to swear that she had not been secretly married. He then expelled Frederick from court. When Charles inherited Aragon, Eleanor followed him to Spain. The pair visited their mother for the first time since childhood, but they barely remembered the woman who had been ravaged by years of isolation. Eleanor was Charles's favorite sibling, but he made it clear who was in charge. He ordered her to marry King Manuel I of Portugal, 30 years her senior and with a pronounced hunchback. Eleanor gave birth to 2 children, Charles, who died in infancy, and Maria. After 3 years, Manuel died of the plague, and Eleanor's stepson became King João III. She was forced to leave her daughter behind and return to her brother, who had recently become Holy Roman Emperor in addition to King of Spain. He captured King Francois of France, and as part of his ransom, he demanded that the French king marry his sister. Francois found his bride very unattractive and rarely slept with her. He publicly flaunted his mistress. Eleanor maintained her composure, was kind to her stepchildren, and devoted to charity work. She attempted to keep the peace between her husband and brother, but could not prevent further war. Francois died after 17 years of marriage, and the 49-year-old Dowager Queen returned to her brother once more. Charles, worn down by the stress of governing a massive empire and grief for his wife, Isabella of Portugal, abdicated and retired to a monastery in Spain. Eleanor visited him often. For years, she had been trying to see her only child, Maria. Finally, after 28 years apart, they were reunited. Eleanor professed her love, but Maria acted haughtily and cut the meeting short. We'll get into why in a bit, as Maria was also one of Henry's potential brides. Heartbroken, Eleanor fell ill on the journey home. She was taken into a farmhouse where she died at 59. Her brother mourned her deeply and died a few months later. What if Eleanor of Austria had become Henry VIII's first wife? Eleanor was flatteringly described as a gracious and graceful beauty with long blonde hair. But as her portraits and her second husband made clear, she was no great beauty. As a member of the highly inbred Habsburg family, she had a number of genetic conditions, including mandibular prognathism, or a protruding Habsburg jaw. Like Francois, Henry VIII was a great connoisseur of women. Had he wed Eleanor, he likely would have been disappointed. He may have tried to annul their marriage on the grounds of non-consummation, as he did with Anne of Cleves, or the young king may have ignored Eleanor in favor of his mistresses. They still may have produced a few children, so there might have been a Habsburg heir to the English throne. However, had Eleanor failed to deliver an heir, things might have played out much as they did, with Henry trying to get rid of a Catholic wife with strong imperial ties in order to marry a mistress. In May 2024, I had the incredible opportunity to host a group of fellow history lovers on a tour of Bonnie, Scotland. We had such an amazing, fun, historical, and low-stress trip with an excellent local guide who planned fascinating experiences and lovely hotels and restaurants for us to enjoy. But the best part was the group. Everyone was curious and kind, and we all became friends along the way. By the farewell dinner, we were already planning our adventure for 2025. And I'd love to bring you with us on my next historic travel adventure. Perhaps we'll explore the ancient ruins of Greece, the picturesque castles of Germany, or the warm palaces of Istanbul. If you're interested in traveling with me in 2025, please take the survey linked in the description for more information and to help me decide where we'll go. In our timeline, Henry married Katherine of Aragon. 24 years of miscarriages and infant deaths resulted in only one child, Mary. Henry broke with the Catholic Church to wed Anne Boleyn. She also produced only a daughter, Elizabeth, so Henry falsely accused her of adultery and incest, and she was beheaded in the Tower of London. Henry instantly married her lady-in-waiting, Jane Seymour. She finally gave birth to his long-awaited son, Edward, but she died in the process. The 46-year-old king moved on quickly from the death of the love of his life, and soon envoys were sent out across Europe to find a fourth bride. Mary of Guise was beautiful, composed, and at 5'11", remarkably tall. She spent her youth at the French court and was close to Princess Madeleine. At 19, she wed Louis II, Duke of Longueville. They had a happy marriage and a son. Louis died in June 1537. In July, Mary lost her dear friend, Princess Madeleine, to tuberculosis. She had just made a love match to King James V of Scotland. He was devastated, but quickly wrote back to France for a replacement. Henry VIII did not want his neighboring enemies, Scotland and France, in bed together. In October, Jane Seymour died, and by Christmas, Henry proposed to Mary to prevent her union with James. The king told the French ambassador that he was big in person and needed a big wife. Mary responded tersely, "I may be a big woman, but I have a very little neck." She wed James instead and brought French music, fashion, and sophistication to the Scottish court. But James was depressed and unfaithful, and Mary was under enormous pressure to produce an heir. She gave birth to 2 sons, but when baby James was 10 months old and Arthur 8 days old, both died on the same day. The grief-stricken king turned his outrage towards his uncle, Henry, who, by the way, had instigated the war that killed his father, James IV. James lost the Battle of Solway Moss and contracted dysentery. He suffered a nervous breakdown and died at 30. While he was on his deathbed, his queen gave birth to a daughter, Mary, who became Queen of Scots at just 6 days old. Henry VIII wanted to wed the baby queen to his 5-year-old son, Edward. Thus, he would be the real power in Scotland. But Mary refused. Outraged, Henry launched a series of raids called the Rough Wooing, which battered Scotland for 9 years. For her own safety, 5-year-old Queen Mary was sent to France. Her mother kissed her goodbye, but remained in Scotland to protect her throne. She visited her daughter and brought French troops back with her to kick the English out. In 1558, Queen Mary wed the Dauphin of France, and Elizabeth I became Queen of England. Henry II opposed the Protestant English queen and supported his daughter-in-law's claim to her throne through her grandmother, Margaret Tudor. He wanted Scotland and England to unite with France under his future grandchild. This put Mary of Guise in direct conflict with Scottish Protestants. With the support of Queen Elizabeth, they rose up against her. In the midst of the conflict, Mary of Guise was found dead in her bedchamber at 44. It was suspected that she had been poisoned on Elizabeth's order, but her autopsy pointed to dropsy. Her corpse was encased in lead and kept in Edinburgh Castle for months. It was secreted out at midnight and brought to France for burial. Her daughter Mary attended her funeral. She had become Queen of France, but she and her husband were controlled and terrorized by her maternal uncles, the powerful Guise brothers. Francois II died at 16 from an ear infection, and widowed Mary returned to Scotland to take charge and live out her own matrimonial adventures. Check out my video all about it. In 1603, her son, James VI, inherited the throne of England. So today, it is the descendants of Mary of Guise, not Henry VIII, who sit on the British throne. What if Mary of Guise had become Henry VIII's 4th wife? Because Mary was Henry's first shot after Jane's death. If she had agreed, Henry would have avoided 3 years of ego-diminishing, bride hunting, and rejection. He might have married her before his poor health rendered him impotent, and before he became obsessed with Catherine Howard. So Henry may have been happy with Mary and stopped at 4 wives, especially if she bore him a son. Mary's lot, wedded to a cranky king eager to impregnate her, would have been the same, although her husband would have been older and less attractive. Because of James V's bitterness towards his uncle, war with Scotland was unavoidable, no matter who the kings were married to. Maria of Portugal was the daughter of Eleanor of Austria. She was just 6 months old when her father died and her mother was forced to abandon her. Maria's hand was in high demand. Her engagement to Dauphin François of France was negotiated by her mother, who was married to the prince's father, but François died at 18. Courtiers presented 16-year-old Maria as a possible bride for Henry VIII. But when Henry learned that, like her mother, she was rather unattractive, the English dropped their suit. Other potential grooms included her cousin, Archduke Maximilian of Austria, James V of Scotland, and the Duke of Savoy. But all fell through. When Maria was 28, her cousin and half-nephew, the future King Philip II of Spain, was widowed. He seriously considered Maria. But when Henry VIII's daughter, Mary I, became queen, Philip chose her instead. Eventually, her half-brother granted her the Duchy of Viseu. She helped the city's artistic industries flourish and built several churches. She became the wealthiest princess in Europe, and her court was like a female university with several women scholars. It was rumored that she had an affair with Portugal's greatest poet, Luís de Camões, but she was resentful about never marrying and focused her blame on her mother. At 38, she met Eleanor for the first time since her childhood, but Maria acted coldly and ended the reunion early, breaking her mother's heart. Maria lived to 56. If Maria of Portugal had become Henry VIII's fourth wife, things might have gone much as they did with Anne of Cleves. However, Maria might not have gone so meekly as Anne did. Rather than a poor princess from a backwater, she was proud, rich, and from a kingdom with growing naval power. This marriage might have spelled a war between England and Portugal. Christina of Denmark was the daughter of King Christian II of Denmark, Sweden, and Norway, and Isabella of Austria. She was a niece of Eleanor of Austria. When Christina was 2, her tyrannical father was ousted and imprisoned by his own people, and her mother died. She was taken in by her aunt, Maria of Hungary, who raised her with love and an excellent education. Henry VIII proposed a match with his illegitimate son, Henry Fitzroy. At this point, he didn't have a male heir and was considering legitimizing Henry, but the Habsburgs were not interested. When Christina was 11, she was married to the Duke of Milan. He was 40, and her aunt raised strong objections to her being wed so young. But her uncle, Emperor Charles V, wanted a treaty, so off to Italy she went. Christina's husband gave her gifts and threw parties to amuse her. He was in poor health and probably never consummated their marriage. He died within a year. Christina returned to her aunt, and proposals followed her. The princess escaped the curse of her Habsburg lineage and was beautiful. Henry VIII sent Hans Holbein to paint her portrait. As she was in mourning, she wore a drab black gown. But Henry still liked her face and was keen. She supposedly turned him down with the remark, "If I had 2 heads, one would be at the King of England's disposal." However, this quote was probably made up years after her death. In reality, Christina had little say in the matter. It was Emperor Charles, salty with Henry for jilting his aunt Katherine of Aragon, who blocked the union. Christina instead married François I, Duke of Lorraine. She wrote, "My husband treats me so kindly and has such affection for me that I am the happiest woman in the whole world." They had 3 children, but he died at 27, and the 23-year-old Duchess was widowed again. She turned down more proposals to remain with her children and serve as regent of Lorraine. Henri II of France and her uncle Charles went to war, and Lorraine was caught in the middle. Henri kidnapped her 9-year-old son. Christina begged on her knees to keep him, but was ignored. 6 years later, when things calmed down, they were reunited. After her father's death in prison, she claimed the title Queen of Denmark, Sweden, and Norway. But despite tentative plans to make an invasion, she remained in Lorraine and helped to raise her grandchildren. She died at 69. What if Christina of Denmark had become Henry VIII's 4th wife? Christina was beautiful and more savvy than Anne of Cleves. Henry may have cherished and spoiled her as he did Catherine Howard. However, she would have had the same problem as Catherine, as a teenage girl married to an old, impotent king. Her hormones may have gotten the better of her, or she might have felt pressured to become pregnant and conducted an affair. But while Henry felt free to mistreat his English wives, he could not have beheaded a member of the Habsburg family without going to war. If Henry had gotten Christina, whether they were happy together or not, he likely would have stopped at 4 wives. But she would have missed out on a few years of happiness. Additionally, Henry may have attempted to use her claim on the thrones of Denmark, Sweden, and Norway to invade those countries and bring them under English rule. Amalia of Cleves, like her elder sister, Anne, was the daughter of the Duke of Cleves. The sisters received a poor education and lacked the wit Henry VIII so admired. When Anne was 25 and Amelia 23, Hans Holbein painted them both. From the portraits, Henry selected Anne, possibly because of her looks, or because as the older sister she had a greater inheritance right. The Duke was poor, so neither sister had a dowry. But as Anne was virtually the only Protestant princess willing to have him, Henry paid for the privilege to marry her. After Anne left, their brother tried to sell Amelia off to the highest bidder, but the only offer came from an 11-year-old boy, so she never married. The sisters never saw each other again, but when Anne died, she bequeathed Amelia a diamond ring. Amelia lived to 68. If Amelia of Cleves had become Henry VIII's 4th wife instead of her sister, things likely would have turned out just the same. In reality, Anne of Cleves traveled to England, but Henry found her unappealing. It may have been her looks, but it was more likely the fact that she was not bowled over with love for the old, overweight monarch with a smelly, ulcerous leg. He offered her a generous annulment package, and she graciously walked away to enjoy her wealth and freedom. Meanwhile, Henry took wife number 5, 16-year-old Catherine Howard, but she got caught in an affair and lost her head in the Tower of London. Henry next pressured Catherine Parr to become his 6th wife, but when she dared to argue with the cantankerous king, he called for her arrest and seriously considered taking a 7th wife. Katherine Willoughby was the daughter of an English baron and one of Catherine of Aragon's Spanish ladies. When she was 7, her parents died, leaving her a wealthy heiress. Catherine became a ward of the crown, and the king sold her wardship to his sister Mary's husband, Charles Brandon, Duke of Suffolk. When Mary died, the 49-year-old Duke wed 14-year-old Catherine. She gave birth to 2 sons. Duchess Catherine was friendly with both Queen Catherine's Howard and Parr. In 1545, Charles died, and the king made advances on the 26-year-old widow. When the king got angry with his queen, he was ready to ditch her for the Duchess. But Catherine Parr was able to calm his temper and save her own life. Henry VIII died soon after. The 2 Catherines remained close friends. They shared a Protestant faith, and the Duchess paid for the publication of a book the Queen had written. When Catherine Parr died in childbirth, Katherine Willoughby raised her motherless daughter. Her own teenage sons died of the sweating sickness, and she was devastated. She fell in love with and married a commoner, Richard Bertie, and they had 2 children. When Queen Mary began rooting out Protestants, Catherine and her family fled to the court of Sigismund II of Poland. They returned when Elizabeth I became queen. Catherine lived to 61. If Katherine Willoughby had become Henry VIII's 7th wife, the famous rhyme would have been divorced, beheaded, died, divorced, beheaded, beheaded, survived. Henry's 7th wife and 4th Catherine would only have to have kept on his good side for a few months before luxurious living caught up with him at 55. Then she would have been a rich dowager queen and could have done as she liked. But she would have mourned the murder of her friend Catherine Parr, and the rhyme just wouldn't have worked. If you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, comment your thoughts, and check out my other history videos. You can also join my Patreon to support my work and get early access to all of my multi-part series. Thank you for watching.